Hi, this is Freddie McGillicuddy and his Callahan friends. I just found something. It's called a folder. A folder, because I'm going through all my stuff as days pass and I'm just getting rid of things. So I found this folder and I just saw it said the writer on it. And I was like, wait a minute. Is that one of my short stories that got published back in the 80s or 90s or something? And it is. I'm going to read it. I don't even barely remember it. I do remember the critiques, the critiques I used to get on my, and it was published, but I don't remember that either. I usually write it down or something, but on this one I didn't yet. I might find it. But I got critiques all the time from editors and publishers that I submitted it to that writers do not write stories about writers. Unacceptable. To which I always wanted to say, contact Stephen King because he's a writer. And almost every single thing he writes about is a writer. Most, not all. So critique him. All right, I'm going to read it. I don't remember it all, so I hope that it's okay. It's called The Writer. When Ellen Hanover, owner and publisher of Artist Magazine, hung up her telephone after speaking at length with her attorney, she was in no mood for company or compassion. Her magazine was no longer hers, and the bitterness that she was so well known for in the last 20 years was all she had left to claim. So in it, she bathed, silent and vengeful. Her world had crumbled into ruin in one quick year, all her plans, her passions, her work. Sons of bitches, she hissed like a witch into the lush office that had been her home, more than her home had. She often talked to herself when she was hating. I'll show 'em all, the sons of bitches. Miss Hanover, her secretary suddenly announced through the speakerphone when she saw that the line had cleared. Mrs. Chamberlain is here to see you. She says, I told you to leave me alone. Ellen snapped, her entire 5-foot frame quaking with her words. Insubordinate Jew secretary. The speakerphone was silent for a moment before Samantha Chamberlain, the managing editor of Artist Magazine, pushed the button and spoke herself. Ellen, I'm sorry, but I have to show you something. I don't want to see anyone, she replied, trembling. Especially you. She hated Sam Chamberlain because she was so good at manipulating her, one of the only people bold enough to even try. Leave me be. The speakerphone hung up, and a second later, Sam Chamberlain came carefully through her office door. Ellen sat down in her butter-soft leather chair and spun away from her as the huge door closed. You're not the kind to become a recluse, Sam said. No matter what happens, Howard Hughes, you're not. Nor are you a loser, Ellen. The world isn't over. Mine is, she disagreed, her voice creaking with age and contempt. Talked to my blood-sucking attorney just now. It's over. He says, close the doors as soon as possible. Cannibals! Sam sat down in the chair before the huge antique desk. Oh, Ellen. Can't even bankrupt the son of a bitch. The vultures have sucked me dry. I would countersue if I could, but I could never win. She started to say, but her words cut off as painful emotion brought tears she thought extinct to her eyes. God, I never thought I'd see this, all I've done. Biggest magazine of its kind in the country. I'm really sorry, Ellen. Oh, she said, her usual tone returning. Leave the sentimentality outside, will you, Sam? I don't need it. I'll find a way to even up. So, just leave me be, like I said. I've got letters to write. Sam stood. She could hardly believe it, but this little fireball of a woman, now 65 years old, was finally beaten. Sam had been her right-hand woman for 15 years and had hated her more than loved her and had gone to bed at night many times praying for the day when Ellen Hanover's downfall would come. Now that it was upon them, it was a bittersweet occasion. Ellen's failure was Sam's as well. How long? She asked solemnly. A few months until most of the advertising contracts are fulfilled. I have to lay out the account reps. I got to lay them off immediately. How many editorial do we have? How much more? Enough to hold out without new assignments? Yes, Sam said. Good, Ellen croaked. Most of the feature material we've been running lately isn't worth shit anyway. Couldn't get any worse. Sam was long used to Ellen's insults. And on that thought, she said, I brought something I want you to read. She held out the short story she had brought in with her. I don't read unsolicited manuscripts. That's your job. You read it. I have read it, Sam remarked. I did. If it weren't special, Ellen, I would never have brought it to you. I want you to read it. Why? The old publisher asked. You're irritating me. Sam laid the papers on the desk, not softly, and stood. Because, she said, after 15 years, you owe me. Ellen Hanover straightened up in her seat as though a spear had been shoved into her spine, and she spun, her cold eyes flashing at her oldest and most tireless employee. That, Miss Chamberlain, will be all. Sam stood her ground longer than she normally would, then turned and left the room. As the door closed and silence swirled about her, Ellen was content to sit the rest of the afternoon gloating and hating the people and the world that had, in the end, beaten her. A week later at her home, Ellen was watching the late news as the story of Artist magazine came leaping out at her with pictures of her in the early days when she began the blessed thing, and videotape taken more recently. She did not hear the words. She knew the stories of her failure better than anyone. She just stared at the screen blankly, recognizing all the faces before her. She frowned. All those years she had given of herself to promote new artists, writers, and a fair share of up-and-coming musicians, and now it was fading fast, snatched right from her hands by stockholders and bankers. What the hell did they know about the arts? Nothing. Ungrateful bastard, she muttered through her teeth as faces appeared before her. Corporate tycoons, a rock star she had helped create, her own jackass lawyer, and members of her staff who were interviewed. All too suddenly, the TV circus was over and the sound returned as a commercial came on, and then the nightmare drew to an all too temporary close. Worthless peons, she said, rising from bed. Imbeciles. She moaned as she went up the stairs. The pain in her back was worse than ever, and she had trouble catching her breath by the time she reached the top landing. As she preferred it, the house was empty. No servants, no ungrateful children, no whining husband. At least there was none of that. In her cold bed, sleep would not come. That wasn't unusual, but she disliked it nonetheless. She pulled the covers to her chest and reached for the latest issue of Artist magazine from her bedside stand and began to peruse it. Worthless piece of crap, she mumbled, thumbing through. Where had all the real talent gone? She spotted a few photos that pleased her and a poem or two, but the rest was lost in mediocrity. She had for a long time blamed it all on commerciality and computers, but she never really believed that. She read a story nearly a third of the way through before losing interest and going on without finishing it like the rest of the world usually did. The ads were all that seemed to matter anymore. The goddamn advertising. The short story that Sam Chamberlain had left on her desk was folded up and stuck in the magazine and fell out onto her lap when she opened to it. Without recognizing it, she unfolded it and began a quick look. It looked like a letter. She soon remembered her confrontation over it. Only boredom prompted her to continue. The story was handwritten in blue ink on both sides of old college notebook paper, far from the required standards of real writers. Ellen laughed her dry, sarcastic laugh, one hoarse, "Eh!" and shook her head. Sam Chamberlain was such a stupid fool. She knew the criteria for writers. Ellen began to read. The writer was obviously young and inexperienced, but there was a good feeling of rhythm to the prose that she noted from the start. The story was very quick and easy to swallow, and even before Ellen had reached the bottom of the first page, she had to force herself to pull her eyes away and press the pages to her lap as she fought the unwilling hammering of excitement in her heart. God, she swore, sitting up, more erect. She was shaking. Never had just mere words enticed such a reaction from her. She had been moved by writing before, of course. All good writers evoked a sense of emotion from their readers. But this was magic. She began again. From the beginning, as she got into it, the words faded from before her. There was no blue ink on white pages anymore, as if the ink and pulp were a visual medium into a different world. She saw real images and felt true emotions, as if she had turned her heart and mind over to some celestial puppeteer, and she was its vessel to be led. She had no awareness she was alive and existing there in her huge bed until the end of the story. After the last word of the final sentence, when she surfaced from its all-powerful grasp. And all she wished was to read on and on. I have never felt anything like it before in my life, she said to an enthusiastic Sam Chamberlain the very next morning. I have felt terror from good horror stories. I have felt aroused from adult erotica. I've been moved by tales of personal triumph against all odds, but I felt two emotions from this story that I've never felt before. Sam shook her head. Jealousy and happiness. Exactly, she piped, circling the room, waving her thin arms. I am not a jealous person, for God's sakes. I've never even been in love. But I was so insanely jealous I could have strangled someone. I know. I felt the same way, Ellen. I was literally moved in ways I've never known. And I don't know how or why. They're only words. And then, Ellen went on, happiness. Real, pure emotion, as strong as a drug, intoxicating. And I can't even say it was just the story itself, Sam tried to explain, still smiling, or the way it was written, or the characters. It all just came together like a formula, you know? Like ingredients, perfect. Not a word could be changed. Not a single comma. Ellen had not felt so refreshed in years. The possibilities, Sam, are enormous. This could change everything. Who is the writer, Sam? She asked. Name is, Alan Weber, I think, she answered. The envelope is on my desk, but there is no return address or return envelope. Postmark says, New York. Well, he's certainly no professional, Ellen said, ushering Sam out of the office by the elbow. But I want to meet him. We have to find him. Has he written before? Not for us. How can we find him? Not in the phone book. I already looked. Well, I want him, Sam. By God, I want him. Sam knew Ellen's desperation. She could be vicious if she didn't get her way. Ellen wanted this talent, not just the story, but the writer. The one individual who could save her publication from terminal oblivion, and if she knew Ellen Hanover like she thought she did, she wouldn't stop until she caught this Alan Weber and put him safely in her pocket. Don't worry, Ellen, I'll keep looking, she answered obediently. Good, Ellen replied. What made you read this thing anyway? Surely you don't read everything that comes in. No, but I do have a small place in my heart for beginning writers. I think everyone deserves their chance. This letter, it sat in the slough pile for weeks untouched. Yeah. After the last deadline, I took it home along with about 10 others and finally got around to it. I give them all a try, at least the first page. Anyone else read it? Just me and you. Tell anyone about it? Sam shrugged. Sure. Terry and Bill, my husband. Fran, my best friend. Damn it! Ellen sparkled. Why'd you do that? Don't tell anyone else about it. You hear? Ellen, I didn't even think you were going to read it. Just don't. Sam frowned, but complied. I won't. 2 weeks went by, and another sad edition of Artist Magazine hit the streets with critical acclaim, although Ellen Hanover hated every word. She had chosen not to run the Alan Weber piece until she met him, much to Sam Chamberlain's dismay. But Ellen had her own reasons. Late on that next Friday, Sam came into Ellen's office with a tattered envelope, red-eyed and smiling. It's him, she said. He wrote again. I've got an address. Ellen's eyes lit up. Weber? She said, standing. Wonderful, Sam. You came through for me. Let's call. Let's set up an appointment. There's no phone number, Sam said, wiping mascara from under her eyes. Ellen could see she had been crying, but she didn't look upset. You read the story, didn't you? Sam nodded. Yes. It's so sad. I couldn't quit crying. Anyone else? Ellen asked. No. Good, she said, taking the envelope. This is our secret, Sam. If one of the bigger magazines found out about him, we'd lose him. I understand. They went to Sam's office in the corner, a ridiculously plain space compared to Ellen's, but practical and worked in. They closed the door. No cover letter? No. Ellen took the envelope from Sam's hand and eyed it like a long-lost love letter. He lives in Queens, she said, looking up at her managing editor. Join me? Sam knew that question was a command, not a choice, but her curiosity had piqued. Of course, she said. Sam noticed that Ellen's fingers were clenched over the steering wheel like white talons, clinging excitedly while her mind was bent on the hunt. They spoke but a little as Ellen drove her BMW further and further into the dark side of the city, past where either of them had ever ventured before. Alan Weber, she smiled. Beautiful name, isn't it? Sam nodded. Turn right up here at the next corner, she said, eyeing the wrinkled map that she held. Ellen slowed the car to a halt at the head of a gray-black street frothed in February haze. The buildings were disjointed, leaning. They loomed no more than 4 stories tall, most boarded with thin steel sheets, and the road was more of a deserted alley than a public street. Still, the sign confirmed itself, Galley Street. Check for numbers, the old crone said. Maybe we'll have to knock door to door. People don't actually live here, do you think? I've seen worse, Ellen smiled. There was only 2 doors with numbers painted on them. Alan Weber's address was somewhere in between. The wind was wicked, but they bundled up and began their search by banging on every door north of the lowest number. Excuse me. They hammered at least 3 times on each door, hard enough to hurt their knuckles, but they were not rewarded. The buildings were all empty. All right, 333 is only a few more doors, Sam said. She looked at the letter's return address, 321 Galley Road. It's got to be one of these 2. Ellen was battling fatigue as she mounted the steps. She pounded, and the door swung open on its own, unlatched by her knocking. For whatever reason, she went inside without pause, eyes useless in the dark. Hello, she called out. The interior was a hideous mess, and it was as cold as it was outside. Alan? Are you here? Sam followed slowly just to get in out of the cold. She wished that she had told someone where she was going. The neighborhood was unnerving. She closed the door behind them. Alan! Ellen cried out louder. Are you here somewhere? There was a shuffle from down the hall and a bit of clanking. Someone was there, and they were coming toward them down the dark corridor. Sam squinted, but could not see. We're from Artist Magazine. We read your piece. It's wonderful. We want to publish it. A shadow announced his presence before he actually entered the room, backlit from a window behind him. It was certainly a man. They could see that, but They did not know why he would not come forward. "I'll pay you $1,000 for it," Ellen said, thinking him shy. "I'll pay you $2,000 to write another one." "I've already got another one," he said, his voice frail and uncertain. You do?" "I've got lots of them," he said, "each one different. Each one unique." "Come out," Ellen said. "Come out so I can see you." "Do you really like my story?" he called after a moment, although he hadn't yet moved. "Ellen, I can't tell you how excited I am. I came over here myself to meet you. Your words. You have done something with words. It's like a recipe." "A tunnel," he corrected, "going straight down." "Yes," smiled Ellen, "you're right. Straight down. Each word exactly after the other without mishap. The reader falls and falls, unable to stop." "Well, that's what happens when I write," he said, his voice mesmerizing in itself. "I'm falling into the story. I'm unable to come out until it's over, but I feel so much while I'm doing it. I can make myself feel anything." "Well, we felt it too," Sam said, straining to see him in the darkness. "If you have more, we want to read it. We want to read it all." Alan finally stepped into view, the blue hue of light crossing over him at a diagonal. He was thin and pale. His sickly eyes, only dark circles in his colorless face. "Not all," he said. And they noticed a pen and paper in his hands as though they were attached there. "Some of my stories aren't good." "We'll be the judge of that." No, you misunderstand me. They're written well, but they aren't good. They can do things." "You don't look well," Ellen said, interrupting him. "When was the last time you ate, Alan?" He shrugged. The loose shirt draped over his shoulders hardly moved. "I don't know. I suppose it's been weeks." "Weeks?" Sam asked. "Since you ate?" Alan nodded. "But I can keep myself from getting hungry by writing, and I can keep warm." I have just like a feather in my throat. "Of course you can," Ellen smiled. "Will you come with us? We'll treat. We'll put you up somewhere out of the cold, will you?" Alan looked at them warily but nodded. "Sure," he said. "Let me get my things." "Bring your stories," Ellen insisted. "All of them." They stopped at a burger place to tie him over until they reached the Carlton Hotel. He looked to them to be about 22 years old, short, scraggly hair as though it had been cropped with dull scissors, and sparse patches of beard. While he showered, Sam went out and bought him some clothes, while Ellen waited in the foyer for him to finish. Her mind was blazing with thought as she sat to read the next story he had given her. Could it be as dramatic as the first, or as sad as the one Sam had spoken of? She prayed it could. By the second page, she was entwined so deeply she wouldn't have set it aside if an earthquake shook the building down upon her. It was definitely erotica, pure adult lust. But she was stirred from it. She had always said that erotica was a cheap sell in literature, a sleazy source of inspiration for masturbators without imagination. But this story was different. She did not have to touch herself to bring on ecstasy. As she read, her body began to tremble and her heart sped. Her vagina flowed with moisture as though she were stimulating it herself. And then, just at the right moment, and her clitoris untouched by any man for more than 2 decades, leaped forward into orgasm as she read, so vibrant and overpowering that she nearly fainted from it. But the story did not end there. It kept going, easier and smoother, seeming to soothe her with each word, caressing her with every phrase. As she turned the last page and the story came to an end, she realized what had happened and burst into tears and wept for pure joy. It was nothing but a miracle. "I'd like to thank you for doing all this for me," Alan told him at dinner that same night. "You're very kind." "Nonsense," Ellen exclaimed, eyeing him hungrily. Her voice hid her excitedness as much as his. It's purely business, Alan, which isn't as bad as it might seem. You have a talent that is it's unsurpassed. You are a sculptor of words. You should enjoy the rewards you deserve. Where are your parents? Sam asked him. Do they live nearby? Queens, he said. They're poor too, but they're hard workers. I'm adopted, I think. Ellen bent toward him like a fox. You keep writing like this and you'll never be poor again, nor will your parents. You'll be able to buy anything money can buy. Well, that would be a dream come true. I've never been successful at anything before. When did you start writing, Alan? The waiter brought them their meals and laid each one before them like a work of art. Just a month or two ago. I never liked writing in school very much. But, then I got this idea for a story. I knew I wanted to write about this little girl, the first one you read, I think. But it was so hard to get started. I had to get the words exactly right. So I started with one word a day, and that's all I would write. Each day I'd add one more. Then on about the 10th day, I read the words I had written, and I felt the strangest feeling, like I had found something. I concentrated very hard, and I started to write, letting the words just guide me. Each word kind of came to mind just as I needed it, and so I copied it like it was some ancient secret flowing through me. I didn't stop until I was finished, and then I sent it to you. I know your reputation for helping new writers. You did right, smiled Ellen. We want to publish one of your stories in our next issue. I'm going to feature it and have an artist do some art for it. I'll run a good teaser on the cover and do a mega publicity. I just can't believe it. I will make you a star, Alan. I've done it before. No other publication cares for new artists like Artist Magazine. We are the best. Well, that's why I sent it to you first, he agreed, chewing his $25 prime rib. But I have a stipulation. Ellen interjected so smoothly and professionally that it was nearly overlooked by even Sam Chamberlain. Alan looked up and met her eye to eye. I want exclusive rights, she said, of everything. Exclusive rights? You do a book, I represent you. You write a story, I handle its sale. You do a screenplay or whatever, you do it through me. That's fair enough, isn't it? I mean, after all, Alan, I'm going to make you famous. I'm going to publish your work for millions to enjoy. Samantha looked from Alan to Ellen and pictured them as a timid mouse and the wiliest of alley cats. She started to speak, but felt Ellen's fingernails pinch her wrist so hard it nearly drew blood. For how long? Alan wisely asked. Forever, Ellen said. Alan looked to Sam, but she showed no expression. I have the paperwork here, Ellen said. Fairly standard. You work for me, and I'll take care of you. Sounds pretty good. Ellen released Sam's wrist to retrieve her purse for the documents. Look, she said without a trace of malice in her voice. She pulled the papers free and pushed them across the table toward him. Look it over while you eat. Take your time. Sam and I will, take a walk. Make arrangements for your room, for your pay. Everything you need to know is in this contract. If you like it, sign it. If you don't, well... Alan watched them as they both scooted back to leave. His face showed an obvious inexperience. He was nervous, yet excited. He shoveled in another bit of rice pilaf as he opened the papers. You think I'm loathsome, Ellen said to Sam as soon as they were away, to say the least. Ellen smiled. Of course I am, but I know exactly what I'm doing. He'll sign it. I'm sure he will. He's scared. This is his one chance. But no court of law will hold that contract up if it's ever contested. No one can sign on forever. Ellen nodded. It will take a long time before he realizes that. And by that time, I'll own everything he writes, plus everything he's going to write for the next 5 or 10 years. And Sam, moral or not, he's going to be better off than he was before he met me. That's beside the point. You're taking advantage of his naivety. It's despicable. Well, at least I'm consistent. You are that. When they arrived at the dinner table a half hour later, the plate was empty, the contract was signed and folded, and Alan had left but one note. Thank you for dinner. I signed your contract. It certainly seemed fair. I'm going to my room to start my next story. Thank you so much, Alan. I feel like dancing, Ellen said, holding the contract to her bosom. Oh, you don't know what's going to happen. I do. It's not good. Thanks for somebody that tipped me. $1 is $1 for a bartender's 20 seconds. As soon as the next edition of Artist Magazine hit the streets, the calls started coming in, and then the letters. Alan Weber was an immediate success. They had chosen the sad story that Samantha had first read, and Ellen did not even read it until she had gotten her first copy from the newsstand at the corner. She read it in the coffee shop at the corner, and oblivious to everyone who stared, she sat and cried her eyes out. The magazine sold out in 1 week for the first time in its history. The offices were flooded with calls from people who had read it and from those who hadn't but had heard about it and were demanding a reprint. Television networks called, major newspapers and national critics all wanted to know about Alan Weber. With such a demand, Ellen Hanover borrowed money for a reprint in mid-month, and instead of her usual 120,000 press run, she printed 600,000. By the end of the month, they were sold out again, and a news story about Alan Weber hit the street in the next issue. The press was so adamant about getting an interview that Sam Chamberlain was spending more time hiding Alan and moving him from secret location to secret location that she couldn't hardly get any other work done. But she was pleased to see how well Alan was looking. His health had returned, and he was looking very happy. He saw the response his writing was getting in the streets and on TV. He laughed as critics and English professors tried to analyze and dissect his work to find out how it worked on the human psyche. Seemingly magical. Ellen did her own experiments as well. Alone at home, she copied Alan's work, word for word, in her own handwriting, and felt herself weave into the story. As long as she followed every character and punctuation exactly verbatim, she was entwined completely. But as soon as one letter came out misspelled or a word was replaced with a synonym, the spell broke, and it was just paper, ink, and a story. No one could duplicate his gift. She was building quite a stockade of power and wealth and was almost ready to take on the corporate executives that were buying her out. With Alan Weber under her belt, she had the power to go up against them and to keep her kingdom. With Alan Weber, she could even own them. She had read all he had written, and it was amazing. He had tapped into his own emotions and could put it on paper for others to likewise experience. And he had said that some of it was not good. In fact, some of it was downright terrifying. His darker emotions literally scared her to death, and for days afterwards, she could not rid herself of the dark images he projected so vividly. But she did not use those particular stories in Artist Magazine. She chose the upbeat stories that made one feel good about themselves and their surroundings, addicting readers by the hundreds of thousands with each new issue. What if, she wondered, he could write things that would change people's minds without them even realizing it? What a political wonder that would be. Or could he influence people's feelings and affections for one another? The possibilities were intriguing. Could he heal the sick? Could he make us open parts of our own brains, allowing our intelligence to expand in leaps and bounds? She would find out each month before the world did as she previewed his amazing work. He was great at taking her ideas and just running with them. She shuddered in excitement. His audience was large. In 5 months, her circulation had grown to 1.5 million copies. Everyone wanted Alan Weber. But he's all mine, she hissed to herself in the coldness of her bed as she shut out the light. Her court case was drawing closer. She wanted all the rest she could get before she was tossed into that pit of vipers. And now I'm going to beat those sons of bitches. Sam Chamberlain had assured her that Alan was safe, that had become Ellen's primary obsession, and tried to comfort her before court that dreary October morning. Are you sure you don't want me to come with you, Ellen? I'll sit with you. Get on, Sam. I'm not an invalid yet, she snapped, smacking at Sam's outstretched hand. I've got the best damn lawyer in the country now. There's no way I'm going to lose. You just get back to work. Don't call Alan. I know the office lines are bugged. They're going to try to take him from me. The office lines aren't bugged. Don't argue anything I tell you, the old lady said, shaking a hand in Sam's face. Just obey me and go. Sam watched Ellen hobble through the giant courtroom doors, hating her and wishing her the worst. She sighed and went down the wide stairs and down the street to the corner cafe for breakfast, but found herself back at the courtroom afterwards instead of the office, waiting patiently for the proceedings to end. Whatever the outcome, no matter how sure the old bat was, Sam was worried. Something hinged on this singular decision. At 1 o'clock, it was over. The door opened, and men in business suits began exiting very quickly, talking excitedly in hushed tones. That wasn't good. Sam looked for Ellen on her tippy toes, and finally the old lady appeared. She was bent and beaten, looking older than ever before, and Sam knew it had been bad. They took him, Ellen whispered into Sam's ear as she fell towards her. Sam caught her in Ellen's old arms, embraced her like a lost child. They took him as part of the takeover deal. The magazine owns him, Sam. Not me. Sam held the old lady up her entire weight as she cried. Despite the sight of a poor, broken woman with only a limited number of years left to live, beaten and deprived of everything she had ever worked for and loved, Sam found herself smiling in response. Ellen Hanover had fought and lost, and now Sam was out from under her cruel shadow. Perhaps her torment was over. As you know, I've only one last issue as owner and publisher, Ellen said to her managing staff of 7. I'd like to make it a real good one. Not a face looked unhappy before her. She was weak, and everyone seemed to like it. No one was outwardly rude, but Ellen could feel their pleasure, their want to celebrate. I suppose that's all. Everyone began to rise when Georgetta Mason, in charge of the graphics department, spoke up. Excuse me, Miss Hanover. Ellen looked up at her. Everyone paused. Can you still fire us? For this last issue, I suppose I can. But the new owners would probably rehire you. Probably. Georgetta smiled. Then I'll tell you what I think of you on your last day, she said. Several managers tried hard not to laugh. None, save Samantha Chamberlain, could keep from snickering. Ellen turned from them without a fight or harsh word, and they were all dismissed. They all hate me, she said. Yes, Sam said, they do. I do too. The next week seemed to take an indefinite time to pass, each moment excruciatingly painful. It was such a chore to get up in the morning that Ellen could hardly face each day. She felt sickness overcoming her, but was too afraid to go to the doctor to find out what it was. Death was coming. That was all she knew. She closed herself in her office and locked the door. Before she read Alan Weber's story for the last edition she would ever pilot, she told her secretary to bludgeon all inquiries until she was done. Then she sat back to read. The story was about a boy. Alan's stories were almost always of children. And like hypnotism, Ellen was drawn into the mesh of fictional creativity and emotional reality. She might as well have been a paper boat midstream in a gigantic flowing river. The rapture was so consuming. The plight of the boy continued, and the story told of unfairness and injustice. As Ellen read page after invoking page, her anger built and built until 3/4 of the way through. She threw the pages away into the air before her while wrath was still at a frenzy within her. She screamed and raked her fingernails across her own face and forearms, drawing blood. She knew all too well where the story was leading. Alan's stories always had good endings. The anger would have certainly been replaced with forgiveness or appeasement. The emotion would have been so strong that great rulers would have laid down their arms in peace, their souls changed. But not her. Ellen had done something that she had not done before. She did not even realize she was able. She had disengaged herself from an Alan Weber story in mid-flow, reveling in the chaotic anger of that moment where she left. Her trembling fingers hit her speakerphone. Yes, Miss Hanover. Her teeth grated as she spoke. Send in Sam Chamberlain, please. The speakerphone clicked. A few minutes later, the door opened. Yes, Alan, Samantha announced. Where is Alan? Right now? Ellen spun her chair to face Sam, and Sam was disturbed in the change she saw in her boss. Right now, she growled. At a hotel uptown. Write it down for me, clearly. Sam drew closer to Ellen's desk and saw the self-inflicted scratches on Ellen's skin. She took the pen and paper that Ellen had set there and wrote down the address and the room number. The Fostetter, she said. That will be all, pretty Miss Chamberlain. Sam wondered why she felt as though she were in the presence of a madwoman holding a horrible time bomb. She was just glad to get out of the fucking room. Alan, can you hear me? Come on, the voice said. Alan was just scribbling the last few words of a story on paper, and as he emerged from the story, he saw Ellen standing above him, face white and anxious. Ellen, are you all right? He asked. We have to go, Alan. Things aren't good. Oh, what do you mean? I've no time to explain. Trust me. We have to go. Alan looked up with his puppy eyes and jumped up to obey. If I can't trust you, Ellen, I can't trust anyone. That's right, Ellen agreed. We'll all, you know what, we'll go out the back way. I've got to get you someplace safe. They left a few minutes later by the back stairway and out of the service entrance into the rear of the hotel. Ellen had told him not to act suspicious, and he did a credible job. They walked about 2 blocks without talking until they got into Ellen's car. I'm so sorry it's come to this, she said, after all we've done. You've got me scared. You've got a right to be. They pulled away and headed north along the expressway. Did I do anything wrong? He wanted to know. No, she assured him. Of course not, but that's not what others are saying. Others who? Well, there are agencies that they have no names, Alan. Men who never know the rulers. Why are they after me? Ellen sighed, her sincerity safely glazed. You have so much to offer this world, Alan. But there are those, and I hate to tell you because you'll realize how primitive our society is, who wish to rid our world of you. But why? Well, they think you're evil. Evil? Yes, they're afraid of you and what you can do. So, Alan, they've killed your parents. He looked at her, grief flushing him. I'm so sorry. They don't want any records of you or any chance they'll ever have another abomination. They weren't even my blood parents, he cried. I'm adopted. God, it's not fair. It won't be in the news. They'll be tapping their phone, just in case you try to call them. I wanted to go see him, he said, his voice quaking, to show them how well I've done. Well, we have to hide you, Alan, someplace they won't look. I'll have to go back and act as though I don't know where you are, play dumb. Alan's hands went up to his face and he began to cry. I understand failure, Ellen said softly, stroking his cheek with the back of her scabbed hand. They took Artist Magazine away from me too, Alan. My whole life's work. Alan glanced up at her. It's all my fault, he said. I didn't mean to ruin you, Ellen. You've been so very good to me. It's not your fault, Alan, she said. I don't blame you. It's those goddamn bureaucrats that did it. Those assholes. Alan's face seemed to tighten. I swear to you, Ellen, I swear we'll get them back. Shh, she said. Just rest, sweet Alan. Those kinds of people never get what they deserve. Never. Well, hell's too good a place for them, the boy said, and Ellen felt a sensual chill race up and then back down her spine as he spoke. Life is too wicked, isn't it? Well, we can get even with them, Ellen, in our own way, but the price we'll have to pay will be just as great. Shh, she simply said, thrilling on how easy it had been to get what she wanted from him. It was the day of deadline, the evening before Artist Magazine went to press. The layout was done, the printer was already working on finished color signatures, and the rest was to be printed and distributed the next morning. It had been a weary month without Ellen's usual whip-cracking. Deadlines had been missed and work was sloppy, but Sam had taken charge since Ellen had thrown in the towel, and the issue made it despite it all. At the end of the day, Sam came into Ellen's office. When's the last signature with Alan's piece going to be to the press? The old woman asked. Sam cleared her throat. Tomorrow morning. Georgette's doing the final graphics tonight. Probably be here till the early hours of the morning. She loves typing his stories. Any word on Alan's disappearance yet? The old woman asked with a jovial twinkle in her eye. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but whatever it is. What? Ellen interrupted. You'll get mad at me? Oh, dear God, no. Sam came toward her. I don't know why you're so bitter, Ellen. Until this latest fiasco, life's been pretty damn good to you. I've always served you well, and you've always made me and everyone else despise you. You're nothing but a mean, contemptible old witch. Made me rich, kept me in control. Hardly worth it. What are you left with now, Ellen? I'll have one last laugh yet. Don't admonish me, Samantha. Hell will do it much better. Sam shook her head. You're such a fool, Sam, Ellen went on. Always a step behind on everything. You could have been somebody in this business. You certainly have the brains and the experience, but no backbone. And you can't keep up, out of the front lines because you're always one step behind. I've done all right, old lady. I've made a meager salary from you, but I suppose this is as good a time as any to tell you that I've been writing under a pseudonym for the last 10 years, writing for other magazines. I'm living pretty comfortably. Got enough to get my kids through college. You got kids? Ellen stumbled over the words. Yeah, that's right, twins. A boy Tommy and a girl Allison. They're 15. I had them just before I came into this wretched hellhole. You're married then? Yeah, that's right. Not that you ever asked before. My husband's name is Rick. He's a computer engineer. If you'd been more cordial, maybe we'd have, had you over for dinner once or twice. No need now, Ellen groaned, looking away darkly. Sam mocked her words. There certainly isn't, she said. So where is Alan? At your place, I suppose? Yes, Ellen said, busy writing. How would you say it? My epitaph? Well, you should bring him back before you're up for kidnapping on top of everything else, Ellen. Is that all? Sam took a deep breath. Just farewell. They offered me this office. She remarked as she went back out the door. But I told them that I wouldn't take it even if it were exorcised. Ellen heard the door click. She brooded for nearly a minute before the laughter could no longer contain itself. Hello, Georgetta, the old familiar voice said. Georgetta looked up from the typesetter screen to see Ellen Hanover hovering like a wraith at the door. Oh, it's you. It's me, Ellen said, hobbling into the well-lit room. Burning the midnight oil, eh? No more than usual, Miss Hanover. I've been keeping these hours at deadline for as long as I've been employed by you. Well, good for you, Ellen said, as if not really listening. This is the last bit of typesetting I have for you, Georgetta. It's to replace the piece by Alan Weber. Replace? The girl asked. His stuff is already done and in the flats over there. I'm replacing it. Georgetta squinted fiercely. Miss Hanover, I've been here since 8 o'clock this morning and was here till 11 last night. I'm tired, and I don't intend to be ripping up finished flats until dawn. Ellen Hanover was holding up 3 $1,000 bills. Does this make it easier? She asked. This is my last night as your employer. As of tomorrow, you're out from under my domain. You'll have a new hierarchy to condemn. But this is so important to me for my last issue, and it's such a short piece. You know, Miss Hanover, I hate you. I literally fucking hate you. Can you save it for tomorrow? Georgetta, Ellen said, having a seat. You can tell me what you think of me then. Now, I'm going to sit right here until you finish. I want to make sure that every word is right. Be a dear and get straight on it. Georgetta took the cash and the ruffled pages of Alan Weber's familiar scribble and with an ugly grimace began to type. The next morning, Samantha found the office as it often was after a hectic deadline, messy and quiet. Offices were empty. People were moving slow. She had arrived early enough to fend off reporters and reviewers trying to catch a glimpse of Alan Weber's latest story, but wasn't having too much trouble. She stopped by Ellen Hanover's office as the old lady was cleaning out the last of her things, placing them in a box. You're kind of early, aren't you? Sam asked between sips of her coffee. Late, Ellen corrected sharply. I've been working all night, she said, and right away Sam could see she was ill. As Ellen passed by, knees wobbling, Sam tried to escort her by the elbow to keep her from collapsing, but Ellen jerked away. Don't touch me, she rebuked. Traitor! Hypocrite! Witch! Sam lashed back. Go to hell! Ellen turned and spat on the floor. Sam watched her hobble away, bent like a twist of coat hanger wire. A few moments later, she was gone, out the door, forever. Ugly trinkets and possessions with her. A cloud of oppression seemed to lift from the room as soon as the door closed behind her, and Sam felt like a new person with a new life ahead of her. But there was something strange happening. She could just tell. Something about evil little Ellen Hanover. She had never worked all night before, not in all the years she had been there. Why now? What sabotage could she have left behind? And she looked so deathly. People at that age couldn't hardly stay up all night. She shook her head, expelling all dreary thoughts, and got to work organizing her things to start the long haul of the next issue. It was only an hour later, when the first graphics employee got into work, that all hell broke loose. Georgetta Mason is dead! The girl screamed as she burst into the executive offices. Sam stood and bolted downstairs as soon as she heard and found exactly that. Georgetta Mason slumped in her chair in front of her typewriter, stone cold dead, eyes wide with terror. Call the police, Sam ordered, checking for a heartbeat, but finding none. But what she did find was $3,000 poking out of her shirt pocket. Sam's eyes went wide. Then she looked around her. Ellen, she mumbled to herself as the scene took order. Always a step behind, am I, you bitch! She reached over and seized the galley of Alan Weber's story, the one that was supposed to run, stuck in the light table. It had been pulled up and replaced with something else, hadn't it? Something diabolical? Something wicked? Something that in typing it had killed Georgetta? She threw the story to the ground and ran for the door. I'm going to Ellen Hanover's place. Call the police and get them over there too, she ordered to anyone listening. She dashed through the building, bursting through the door into the parking lot and sprinted toward her car. As she pulled out of the lot into the street, she realized that Georgetta must have died while typing the story and that Ellen had taken over her seat and finished just the end of it only, probably nearly killing her as well just to do that. That's why she looked so bad. And then she pulled the old story and replaced it with the new one. What a horror. My God, it's hitting the street this afternoon, she said aloud. Millions of copies. And everyone will turn straight for Alan's story to devour it. The lawyers, the new owners, everyone who hated her. She pulled into Ellen's driveway and dashed from her car toward the front door. It was locked, and Ellen wouldn't answer the bell or respond to the pounding. I know you're in there, Sam screamed. Let me in. I have to call the printing press and stop it. Ellen, for God's sake. She couldn't wait for her to answer. She found a rock and busted out a ground story window, flipped open the latch and climbed through. Ellen, this is insane, she cried, running for the phone. She took it off the hook, and as she started dialing, but it was no use. The line was dead. She slammed the receiver in anger. Always a step behind. The witch had her pegged, didn't she? Alan! She cried out, and she ran through the hall and up the steps. She couldn't get her mind off of it. 2 million issues printed and distributed. Workers at the printing plant were probably already dropping like flies if they were reading the story. How would they explain it? Mass heart attack? You're sick, she wailed as she ran down a hall. Where's Alan? You old witch. She burst into Ellen's bedroom at the same time the gun went off. Samantha looked at little Ellen in her pretty lace bed, holding the dark pistol in her right hand, with Alan, dead himself after writing the inspired piece, lying cold and quiet beside her. Then she looked down to the hole in her own chest and the blood running in streams down her abdomen. There was so little pain that she felt an ironic smile blossom on her face. Wretched bitch, Ellen said to her as Sam fell to her knees and then down onto her face on the floor. Ellen drew up the covers to her sagging breasts and cuddled up next to her mottled lover, her young beloved writer, and pulled out the original manuscript written in Alan's own handwriting, and she began to read it. Wait till they read this one, she said as she put her arm around his neck and pulled him close. It's going to just kill him. The end.